Okay, folks, in this video, we are going to continue learning a little bit more about the layer panel and the various options that are available to you folks. Starting off, let's go with the visibility of layers. Now, you folks will notice the eyeballs here on the left side of the layer panel, and you can turn the visibility of each layer on and off by clicking on the eyeball. Now, you notice that I don't have to make the layer active by clicking on it to turn off the visibility of a layer. Now that's not true if you're using tools on a layer. In order to use tools on a specific layer, like say if I wanted to mark up the Joshua Tree layer or layer 1, I would have to select it. And it has to be a rasterized layer. If you folks watched my first video concerning layers, I explained a little bit about smart object layers that are indicated by this little icon in the lower right hand corner of the thumbnail versus that's a smart object layer versus rasterized layer, which is not a smart object. And of course, rasterized layer, which is this layer here, does not have that icon in the lower right hand corner. And I'll touch on that just a little bit more in just a second. But getting back to the visibility part, yeah, you don't have to select the layer to turn the visibility off and on. You can do it regardless if the layer is selected. But if you're editing a layer, you need to select the layer before you start marking it up. Okay? Now, I wanted to quickly show you folks some options that are available to you folks when you right click on a layer. Okay? Now, right clicking on a layer will give you folks a drop down list here. Some items would be available to you, some that are grayed out are not. You have a few more options available to you when your layer is a smart object. See, right clicking gives me a few more colored in items as opposed to the grayed out items. And the grayed out items will become available to you once you do a few more steps. Now, I'm not going to show you folks every single option or action here in the list, only the ones that I use a lot and at your folks' current skill level and experience will probably use as well. The rest, once you folks get a little bit more experience with Photoshop, you folks can explore on your own. There's lots of videos on YouTube to show you folks all these different options, okay? So, one feature that may be of interest to you folks, I'll show you right now, is down here. These color options allow you to color, place a color in the visibility area. Now, all this does is give you a visual representation of where that particular item is. The only reason for this is, say if you have a lot of layers. For that, I'll add a whole bunch of layers right now by clicking on the add a layer icon down here. See, so I have 17 layers, all of which don't have really anything right now on them, but as you see, the more layers I add, it pushes some layers down. And for example, if we take a look at Taft here and we separated his picture out into parts, say a whole bunch of layers were part of his head, like you could have one layer for his hair. Let me switch to my move tool here. You could have one layer for his hair, one for his head, one for his eyes, one for his nose, his mustache, so on and so forth. So that could be a whole bunch of layers. And of course, if you don't rename your layers, or even if you did rename your layers, scrolling through a whole bunch of layers, especially if the layers start getting up into the 50, 60, or even 100 layers. Scrolling through all those layers could be scrolling through all those layers, trying to find those specific items may be a bit cumbersome. So, Photoshop has included this color coded options here where, say, if you had a whole bunch of head parts and you wanted to quickly find them throughout the list, you could color code all the layers that comprise his head. And after scrolling through a whole bunch of items, you'll know just exactly where the head parts are. And say maybe the green was for his body or something like that. So all the color system does is it adds a visual indicator for you folks so that when you are scrolling through the list, it gives you a quick visual representation or quick visual way of finding items or a group of items really fast. Okay, so that's all the color system does. It's a good way to organize your layers. Another good way to organize layers is by using the folder system, which is this icon right here next to the Add a Layer button. By adding a folder, you can add layers to a folder. It helps clean up your layer list here, and you can do changes to the folder that affects all of the layers in the folder. So let me show you folks that now. All I'm going to do is click on this icon right down here at the bottom, and it adds a folder. Now, you folks may be wondering why it added the folder between layer 16 and 17. So let me back up. I'm going to hit Command Z, Control Z for you guys on the Windows to back up. And whatever layer is currently selected, in our case it's layer 16, it's currently the selected layer. When you click something like add a new layer or add a folder, Photoshop will automatically add a new layer or a folder over the currently selected layer. So if layer 14 was my currently selected layer and I click add a new layer, it would add a new layer above 14. Now this is layer 18 because the last known layer number was 17. So it'll add a new layer, 18, but it does it above the currently selected layer, which was 14. A little bit confusing, huh? As you folks progress with your experience with Photoshop, you guys will catch my drift as far as how these things work. So I'm going to select layer 16 once more and add the folder, and of course it adds it right above 16. Now I want to add all these red marked layers, so layer 16 through 13, to the folder. So the way to do that is you simply left mouse click, hold, and drag a layer right over the group 1 folder layer. Okay, so I'm going to do that with 16 right now. So I'm going to left mouse click and hold it down and drag the layer and release it right over the group 1 layer. Now you notice that the layer is now indented, meaning that's a visual representation that that layer is now a sublayer of group 1 folder, or it's inside of the folder. That's basically what it means. If the thumbnail is all the way to the left, that means it's outside of the folder. So let's continue and add the other 4 layers here. Now, after you add your first layer, you don't have to go all the way up to the group 1 folder and release to add a layer. what you can do is just left mouse click and drag, and you notice the blue line there. Once the blue line is within the folder area, you can let go and it'll automatically be in the folder, and you know it's in the folder because of this little indentation here. So just let me add this last layer here. Okay, so now I have all 4 layers inside of the group 1 folder. By the way, you can rename group 1 by double clicking on it and changing it to whatever name you want. I'm just going to call it folder. Now you can expand or collapse the folder by clicking on this arrow right here. If I click on it, it closes up the folder and those layers disappear. Those layers are still there, they're just collapsed down in the folder. So clicking on the arrow again will expand the folder and you get to see those layers once more. And it's a good way to clean up your layer list. And if you wanted to name this, say for example, remember what I used as an example earlier. I said if for example Taft's head were all the red colored layers, well, we could have named this folder head. And now you know that all of the components that comprise his head is in that folder. And as I said before, you can control all of the layers or do adjustments to all of the layers at one time by working with the folder layer. So for example, you can turn the visibility of items on or off individually, or you could turn off visibility all at once. Let me get rid of all these layers and put in some other images to demonstrate that a little bit better. Okay, so I'm going to bring in my Photoshop class files folder and add a few more pictures like Poppy. Let's put Poppy right there. And let's go with La Fruta. Hope I'm saying that right. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Okay, so we got a total of 4 images here. 3 smart object images, as indicated by the icon in the lower right hand corner of the thumbnails, and a rasterized image without the thumbnail or icon in the lower right hand part of the thumbnail. Now say if I wanted to group all of the smart objects into a folder, I would click on the folder here. So I have my folder, and remember, you just drag and drop the images into the folder as such. And I know they're in the folder because it becomes indented. I can close up the folder and whatnot. So I could turn the visibility of each of the images on or off by themselves, or if I wanted to turn off the visibility of all of the items in this folder, I just click on the visibility of the folder and all of the items disappear at once. All right. So adding a group will allow you to organize. It's a secondary way of organizing your layers besides adding color to the visibility area. Like if I were to add red to these items here. Okay. All right. Now let me touch a little bit on the smart object versus rasterized object thing that I explained about in a previous video. For that, I'm going to pull in another image. Let me close up my group here for a second. And I'm going to pull in this Tiki image and put them right here. Now, I'm going to make a copy of this layer. And to make a copy, all I have to do is drag this layer, left mouse click, hold and drag down to the create a new layer icon here. Now the create a new layer icon, if I click on it, of course it creates a new layer, or it can also act as a way of duplicating a layer. So if I left mouse click, hold and drag this layer down to the create a new icon, create a new layer icon and release, I now get a copy. So I have a copy of my original here, and it doesn't look like anything happened because when Photoshop creates a copy, it creates the copy directly over the existing image that you made a copy of. So if I use the move tool, I can move this copy image over to the right or left, whatever, and you can see that it's the copy by clicking the visibility on or off. Here's the original, and here's the copy. All right. Now you can do the same thing. Let me get rid of this. So remember to delete a layer, you do one of three things. You can either click on the trash can and hit yes. You can left mouse click, hold and drag the layer down to the trash can and release it. Or you can right click and choose delete layer. Or, so there's a fourth way, sorry. You can just hit, with that layer selected, the one you want to delete, you can just hit delete on your keyboard or backspace. Okay, so creating a copy or deleting a copy, you can drag the actual layer down to either of these icons, or you can right click, you can duplicate a layer, delete a layer, or you can group from layers, creates a folder. You can click on that. Same thing as clicking on this folder. So let me create a copy again. And you can keep creating as much copies as you want. So you can just keep dragging that down. If you want to create multiple copies at once, so let me undo that. So I have a copy right now, these two. Say if I wanted to make 4 copies. So I would hold down the shift key, click on the original tiki head, and left mouse click and drag anywhere on either one of these two down to create a layer. And now I have 2 copies. So if I drag that down, and I can keep doing this as much as I want. So let's back up and just stick with these 2 for now. Now I'm going to show you folks one of the key differences between a rasterized layer. Currently, the only rasterized layer we have is the Joshua tree layer down here. But you can convert a smart object into a rasterized layer by right-clicking on it, and from this drop-down menu, selecting rasterized layer. As you can see here, this tiki head copy is now a rasterized image. It's no longer a smart object like its brother here to the left. Now I'm going to show you the difference between a rasterized image, or the advantages, disadvantages of a smart object versus a rasterized image. For the smart object first. Okay, so let's go click on the tiki head. Say if I want to change the size of the image. So I'm going to hit the hotkey Command, hold down Command and T for transform. Of course, on your Windows computers, it's going to be Control T. And I'm going to make the image really, really small. Okay, hit enter to accept the new image size, which is right here, and then scale it back up again. Hold down command, hit T, and drag it back up in size. Yeah, as you can see, it's still nice and crisp. No blurriness to it whatsoever. Now let's do the same thing with the rasterized image. And you'll see that the image will become extremely blurry. Okay, so hit enter. And I'm going to resize it back to its original. Hit enter. As you can see, as compared to the original, it's now really blurry. And that pretty much shows how a smart object versus a rasterized image, it shows the difference. A smart object, you could think of it sort of like a container or a folder that encloses around of an image. And you can make adjustments to that smart object without affecting the original quality of an image. Whereas with a rasterized image, any changes you make will become permanent, and it sort of it's hard to explain without showing you folks visibly. With the rasterized image, you can edit using brush tools. So if I want to mark up this tiki head, I can. But if I choose the smart object version, as you notice with my icon here, I cannot use the brush tool on a smart object. So that's kind of the difference between rasterized and smart objects. Another good thing about a smart object is, for example, let me try pulling in a new image. So let's get rid of our tiki heads. So smart object versus rasterized in terms of transforming or scaling. That's one advantage right there. So I'm going to trash these. Let's open up our group here and select Poppy. Now I'm going to make Poppy or scale Poppy up a little bit here. So the Poppy image is a smart object. And what you can do is you can add adjustment filters to smart objects. You can even add adjustment filters to rasterized images. It's just that there's a little bit more control with smart objects. So this icon here next to the folder is the adjustment layers icon. If I click on it, you notice there's a whole list of adjustment layers here. So for the Poppy, I want to change hue and saturation. You get a little property window or panel that pops out, and that's this right here. For me, at least, the property windows is located there. For you folks, it may be here next to adjustments, or if you folks don't have it at all, you guys could always go to window and click on properties, and you'll get one that pops out. So mine is here, and I just added a hue and saturation adjustment layer. And right now, as it is, the hue and saturation layer, if I make any adjustments to it, it will affect all of the layers below it. If you want to have this hue and saturation layer affect only the poppy layer, what you need to do is click on this icon right here. And what that does, let me close this up, a quick one, is it tells Photoshop, hey, Photoshop, I just want this adjustment layer to affect the layer directly below it. And as you can see here, there's an icon with the down pointed arrow that tells Photoshop this adjustment layer should only affect poppy. Now I'm going to turn that off by clicking on this once more. And as you can see, that down turned arrow is no longer there. So when I do make my adjustments, say I'm going to want to change the color, you notice here that I'm changing the colors for everything. That's because this adjustment layer is above everything. Now if this adjustment layer was, let me get rid of it, I'm going to trash it really quick. Say if this adjustment layer was on La Viruta, okay? So selecting La Viruta, remember the rule with any of these items here, with the exception of these two, for any of these three right here, whatever is the active layer, if you click on any of these, it'll add a layer just above it. So for our case, for adjustment layer, I want to change the hue saturation, and it adds a hue saturation layer right above La Viruta, because La Viruta was active when I choose to add a hue and saturation adjustment layer. Now, opening up my properties panel, if I change the color, it'll change the color of La Viruta, Taft, and layer 1, which is the Joshua Tree background, but you'll notice that poppy doesn't change. So let me do that right now. Okay, so everything but the poppy is changing. Taft doesn't really change that much because he's a black and white photo. So any layers below the adjustment layer will be affected unless you click this icon down below in the properties panel. By clicking that, you're telling Photoshop, hey Photoshop, I only want this adjustment layer to affect the layer directly below it and none of the others. So now when I change, this is La Viruta image. Now when I change the image, only La Viruta's color changes. Okay, so that's how an adjustment layer works. All right, so let me get rid of that. So adding a hue and saturation adjustment layer above poppy, I want to make sure that instead of it affecting all the rest of the layers, it only affects poppy. So I'm going to click on here and change the poppy picture, make it a bluish purple flower. Now you notice it also added a mask here. What that mask allows you to do is to further edit what part of the image you want the hue and saturation, or any of these, if you choose any of these other items, what part you want it to affect the picture. And I'll get into masking in just a bit after this. So just know that you can use adjustment layers to change in a non-destructive way certain aspects of a smart object. Okay, so let's select Taft, and let's put a adjustment layer of brightness contrast on him. Remember, right now, if I change the brightness or contrast, it's going to change not only Taft's brightness or contrast, but also layer 1. So, click this icon to lock it to Taft's layer only. And now if I change the brightness or darkness, only Taft's image is affected and none of the rest. Alright, so that's how you add adjustment layers to your smart objects. Now, let me get rid of these smart layers by dragging them down to the trash can. Layer masks. Nope. So I'm just going to drag this down here. Okay. Now I am going to show you folks about layer masks. And I'm going to select Poppy to show you folks the layer mask. This icon here is the layer mask icon. When you click on it, it adds an extra thumbnail to that layer. Okay, so let me do that again. Select the layer that you want to add a layer mask to. In my case, I want to add a layer mask to Poppy. Then you come down to the layer mask icon and just click on it. And Photoshop will link, you can see the little link icon here, a layer mask. A layer mask is basically an invisible covering over your original image, and you can paint in a mask that will cover certain items of your original image and let other items show through. So let me demonstrate that to you. Now, if you remember, just a few moments ago, I said that you can't use brush tools on a smart object, and you cannot. But you can use the brush tool on the layer mask. The layer mask is not a smart object, but it does affect a smart object. Okay? So say if I wanted to cut out the flower or mask the background here. Of course, I could go with my selection tools. I could convert the smart object into a rasterized object, and I could use my selection tools like the polygonal tool and trace around the flower and delete the background. But that would be a destructive way of separating the flower from the background. Okay, because destructive meaning that I would delete or destroy the background. Now, if you want to keep the background intact, just in case you change your mind later on, there's a non-destructive way of getting rid of the background while still keeping your original image. Okay. In fact, let me show you that by making a copy. Let me back up in history first, so I'll go backwards. I'm going to make a copy of the Poppy image. Let me turn off the visibility for Taft and Ruta for just a second, and I'm going to bring Poppy right here. I'm going to make a copy of Poppy. So you folks, I just showed you folks how to do that. You drag the Poppy down to create a new layer icon. And now I have a secondary Poppy right here. And I want this Poppy to be behind this one, so I'm going to change the position from here to right below the original poppy, and now you see the original poppy came in front. Okay, so I'm going to, let's see, I'll choose this poppy and rasterize it so it's no longer a smart object. So I'm going to right click, rasterize layer. So now this poppy is just like layer 1, the Joshua tree, and it is a normal regular layer, not a smart object like its brother here. Now I'm going to show you the difference between destructive editing versus non-destructive editing. And usually non-destructive editing is associated with smart objects. Okay, so let's start with the smart object poppy first. And as I said before, I can add a layer mask to it. So with that layer selected, I'm going to click on layer mask. It gives me a layer mask here. And using your brush tool, you will paint out the background using black and white. Okay. Let me make my brush tool a little bit larger by hitting the right bracket key. Okay. Now, when you're dealing with masks, the layer mask or any type of mask, you only need two colors, black or white. Black, when you have a layer mask and you paint with your brush tool, when you paint black, you're hiding whatever you paint over. If you paint with white, if you switch it up by clicking this icon here, you're showing whatever is hidden. So let me demonstrate that to you now. I'm going to start off with black, and I'm going to paint on the background of my original poppy picture. Now I know the layer mask is active because it has these little white corner brackets around the corner of the thumbnail here. So I know this is active. If I click on this thumbnail, you notice the brackets move to this thumbnail. But I want to be working on the layer mask. So using black and my brush tool, I'm going to paint on a background, and you notice that it hides or takes away the background here. So wherever I paint gets hidden. Wherever I didn't paint is still shown. As you can see here in my thumbnail, wherever I painted black is represented in a thumbnail. So this is a really quick way of getting rid, in a non-destructive way, your background. Of course, I'm being sloppy here because, of course, the leaves are a little bit more, they're not straight across, but you guys get the gist of how the mask works. Now, if I was to switch to white and paint, I would paint the mask off, or take away the mask, essentially. So now you guys pretty much can tell the difference between using black and white on a layer mask. And as you can see here, I painted away all the black. So I'm going to switch back to black again by clicking on this icon in the upper right hand corner here and paint away the background. I'm just doing a quick and dirty job. Of course, when you folks paint away whatever it is you want to paint away. I'm hoping that you folks will do a lot, or take your time and do a lot better of a job than I am. This is just for demonstration purposes, so I'm doing it quick and dirty. Okay? So that's how to get rid of the background. Remember, this is still a non-destructive way of taking out the background. And as you can see here, whatever is white, in this case the flower, is still shown. Whatever is black, in this case the background, is hidden. Okay? So that's non-destructive. Destructive, so we'll put that aside for now, and let's go to the Poppy Copy, which is a rasterized image, and you folks know that it's rasterized because it does not have the smart object icon in the lower right hand corner. Let me turn off the visibility of this Poppy for now so we can work with this one. And I'm going to use my lasso tool and just quickly draw around the poppy flower really quickly, so it's messy, but you guys will get the gist of what I'm trying to do in this demonstration. And I'm going to right click, select inverse, and I'm going to hit delete. So let me turn the visibility of the other poppy back on. So now we have two poppy flowers that have been cut out, one in a non-destructive and one in a destructive. So this is where the non-destructive and destructive comes in. You folks may be saying, well, I can always Command Z on the regular poppy to bring back the flower. That's true, but if from this point on you start doing other edits to other pictures, say on Taft, you start doing some other edits or whatnot, your history here starts to get longer, and eventually Photoshop will only remember up until a certain number of redos or history. So it only can redo or go back a certain number of times. In my case, it's about 50. So if from this point on I make 50 edits or 51 edits, the fact that I cut this out will get erased, and I can no longer bring back the background. Also, any work I've done up to that point, I would have had to undo it. So with a smart object that has the layer mask on it, or actually it doesn't even really matter if it's a smart object or a rasterized image, because layer mask will work with a smart object or with a rasterized image. Sorry about that, I didn't want to get you guys too confused, but layer masks will work with either smart objects or rasterized images. But just to show you folks, so we cut out the background on both poppies. Now with this poppy here, once I cut out the background, that's it. You know, if I was to save this right now and come back later, I won't have the history anymore, and I can't undo this. This is done with already. So that's destructive. Non-destructive, which is this poppy right here, means that I can undo the editing. And the way to do that is to get rid of the layer mask. If I drag the layer mask down to the trash can and get rid of it, like so, I still have the background there. Okay, whereas with my rasterized image down here, I don't. Okay, so um, that's the difference between destructive and non-destructive editing. So for the most part, I think it'll be easier if you guys work with smart objects most of the time. And if you have to edit a smart object, like paint over it, what I would do is probably create another layer above it instead and work on that layer. Okay. Now, if you have to make a clone copy, you can't do it on a smart object. So let me demonstrate that to you right now. So I have the clone tool active, and notice as I have the poppy layer active, I can't edit it in any way, but I can edit the rasterized version of the poppy, which is this one here. So that's one of the drawbacks of a smart object versus a rasterized object. Also, if I wanted to paint on the rasterized object, I can. If I select the smart object, I cannot. You'll get this little pop-up window that says this smart object must be rasterized before proceeding. Okay, so there's some benefits and drawbacks to smart objects, and some benefits to rasterized images. What I sometimes do is I rasterize the image. So say Poppy right here, the original Poppy, this one. I rasterize it by right clicking, rasterize layer. Okay, the smart object icon disappeared. I can make my edits. Then you can convert it back to a smart object again. But just know that once you do that, that these edits or whatever become permanent. So what I sometimes do is if I'm going to change an object to from a smart object to a rasterized object, what I'll usually do is create a copy first. So now I have a copy. Let's get rid of this poppy here. So now I have a copy of the original. I turn off the visibility on the original. Then I come to the copy. I rasterize it. Then I do whatever edits I have to. And later on, if I don't like it, I can always get rid of the copy, but still have the original available. Okay? So just something to think about for you folks as you're editing your images, that, you know, whether it be rasterized or if you want to work with a smart object. And once again, the layer mask will work either with a smart object, or if I go to layer 1 here, let me turn off the visibility of the poppy. This image here is a rasterized, and I can still add a layer mask to it. So say if I wanted to paint out the sky, I have my brush tool active, black, and it's white when I paint away the sky because the background is white. If I came to the background and added a color, say green, let me turn off the visibility of this right now. Now I can add green by painting the green in, or the hotkey for filling in the layer would be Command Delete Oh, I'm sorry, I can't do that on background layer because it's locked. Okay, so let me add a layer, layer 2, do a command delete. Oh, sorry, option delete, sorry. I was actually adding white. So you can actually add green to the background. Sorry about that, folks. I was hitting command delete. Command delete adds white to the background. Option delete adds green. And for you Windows users, um, control delete would have added white, I believe. Let me do that again. Command Z. So command delete, yeah. So control delete would add white on you Windows computers, and alt delete would add the green. And it's option delete for, or option delete on a Mac will add green. Command delete on a Mac would add white. On a Windows computer, control backspace or delete, whichever key you have on your keyboard, would add white, and alt backspace would add the green. Okay, now that's all settled. Let's come back to Joshua Tree here and click on the layer mask. As you notice, the green background is showing through all the parts of the sky that I paint out with the layer mask. Okay. So if I want to add the sky back, remember all I have to do is click white and I can add the sky back. Now just a little fun fact, what you see me doing here, if you folks ever watch any type of movie that has special effects, like a lot of the Marvel movies, you'll notice that some of the actors have wires on them, in the special features section of the DVD um, or the downloaded movie you have. They usually have the background scenes or the specials where you see the actors on harnesses and whatnot. What they do is, maybe not in Photoshop, but in whatever editing software they use, they're using a mask and they're painting out the wires, usually frame by frame, so that you don't see the wires around the person. This is the same concept right here. That's what they do. Okay? So I'm not going to continue on with painting out the sky, but that's how a layer mask works here in Photoshop. So in the next video, I'm going to cover the last few items of the layer system.